Today on the Matt Walsh Show, trigger warnings are becoming more and more common as Hollywood puts them in front of movies and television shows to help the audience avoid trauma. But since when did trauma become such a common and frivolous thing? We'll talk about that. Also, cable news journalists are worried that Trump will get elected and then put them into camps. Is there any validity to that concern? The WNBA is enjoying unprecedented interest and publicity, and yet will still lose $50 million this year, according to a new report. And the mental health establishment has invented a new condition. It's called time blindness. Apparently, you aren't a lazy procrastinator. You're just blind to time. We'll talk about all that and more today on the Matt Walsh Show. The cost of living is up almost 20% from 2021, and families everywhere are feeling the burden. If you're looking at your bills, wondering how in the world you can save on monthly expenses, start with your phone bill. I'm happy to announce that Pure Talk is now providing international roaming to over 50 countries. Once again, Pure Talk is investing in their customers with their own money and without charging you an extra penny. As you plan your summer travel, make sure your wireless provider has you covered at home and abroad. Pure Talk already puts you on America's most dependable 5G network, but now they're offering coverage in over 50 countries as well. Enjoy the freedom of unlimited talk, text, and ample 5G data for just $20 a month with Pure Talk. This is a deal that's hard to beat, costing you less than half of what you pay with other networks. Not only is their U.S. customer service team ready to assist you with a seamless switch, they also have fantastic savings on the latest iPhones and Androids. Ready to make a smart switch? Join my cell phone company, Pure Talk, and start saving today. Visit puretalk.com/Walsh to explore their offers. When you make the switch, you'll have an additional 50% off to enjoy on your first month. Don't miss out on the opportunity to save on wireless at home and abroad. Visit puretalk.com/Walsh. That's puretalk.com/Walsh. Well, if you spend any amount of time watching shows on streaming services like Netflix or Hulu, then you may have noticed that several big-name productions are now putting trigger warnings on the screen before some pivotal episodes. The show Baby Reindeer, for example, warns its viewers in advance of an upcoming scene depicting sexual violence. Better Call Saul alerts its audience about an upcoming suicide. Other popular shows like Severance, The Morning Show, Life and Beth, and several others also include similar messages before the shows even begin. And even classics like Goodfellas and old shows like All in the Family now come with warnings about ethnic prejudices and that sort of thing. Of Disney shows, old Disney movies also have these warnings. Online, these trigger warnings have caused a lot of consternation because they often ruin the episode that people are about to watch. If you know that a suicide is coming, for instance, it's usually not too hard to guess which character might be involved. Probably the character that's been having serious mental problems all season. And even if you're not sure what character might be involved, it still blunts the dramatic impact of the scene to be told directly that something shocking is about to happen. There's a reason that Shakespeare didn't have some guy go on stage before the fifth act of Romeo and Juliet to explain that poisoning and self-harm would occur. There was no stagehand to announce, if you're not ready to see two lovers take their own lives, then leave the theater immediately. But we live in a much dumber time now, of course, so trigger warnings like that are no longer unthinkable. In fact, if you go see a play like Romeo and Juliet, there's a very real chance you might run into one even in that context. For several years now, theaters all over the world have been incorporating these kinds of advisories. Watch.
Western Canada Theatre's recent staging of musical Children of God came with a warning about mature and potentially triggering scenes involving residential schools and sexual abuse. Armstrong's War, a play about an injured Afghanistan vet, was said to contain some potentially triggering content about the horrors of war and mental illness.
In many ways, the point of the theater is to trigger emotions in an audience. But it's incumbent on us as theaters to make sure that we provide an environment in which the audience can feel that they can undergo those experiences in a safe environment with other people.
McDonald is part of an international theater trend. Productions are getting more graphic, more violent, like this 2014 staging of Titus Andronicus by Shakespeare's Globe that had people fainting in the aisles. There's a demand by both the audience and theater establishment to be mindful of people's emotional welfare. Even England's famous Royal Court Theatre now uses trigger warnings. But not everyone thinks trigger warnings are a good idea.
Now, that report was from a few years ago, but the trend has only continued. The Sir Thomas Allen Theatre in Durham, UK, for example, posted this notification on its website just a few months ago about the play I, Joan, which also premiered at Shakespeare's Globe. Quote, content warning, loud music, partial nudity, period-accurate transphobia, depictions of war. So period-accurate transphobia is now worthy of a trigger warning, which I guess means that every single play and work of literature and film and television show that came out before 2015 needs at least that trigger warning, if not so many others. And of course, I could go on and on about how absurd these warnings are and how counterproductive they are, but there's really no point. You know, you've maybe heard about the research demonstrating that these trigger warnings are worse than useless. I mean, they don't even do the thing that they're supposed to do. If we agreed that it was worth trying to do that thing, which it isn't, but more than a dozen studies have shown that these kinds of notifications are either ineffective or actually they can be more distressing to the people whose fragile emotions you're so worried about. And this is becoming a mainstream position. Bill Maher did a whole monologue about it a year ago. Dr. Phil's talked about it with Joe Rogan and so on. Instead of retreading that ground, I wanted to look more closely into why exactly these warnings came about in the first place. They seem like a symptom of a much larger problem that's gone mostly unnoticed. And I came to that realization after the outlet Variety ran a piece on this a few days ago on the problem that these trigger warnings can cause. And throughout their article, Variety kept using the term trauma again and again. Quote, as content advisories become popular, Hollywood tries to find a balance between ruining plot twists and helping viewers avoid trauma. That's the headline. Then the article continues, a growing number of programs have opted to inform viewers before showing potentially traumatizing content. The goal is to help viewers enjoy TV without trauma. They even speak to a medical expert about how trigger warnings relate to trauma, quote unquote. And this caught my attention because up until relatively recently, when people heard the word trauma, they thought of serious, violent injuries, very terrible things happening, the kind that people might suffer in car accidents or on the battlefield, for example. And if you heard that somebody was traumatized by something, then you would immediately assume that they were in a war zone, that something like that had happened to them. And that's how the medical profession understood the word trauma as well. But somewhere along the line, something obviously changed. And trauma became a daily occurrence rather than something suffered by people in the most extreme and harrowing circumstances. Everyday discomfort and mild inconvenience has been medicalized and overblown into trauma. And we've seen this a lot in the past couple of years. You might remember the whole episode when the tennis player Naomi Osaka dropped out of a tournament and melted down at a press conference back in 2021. The idea was that talking to the press was traumatic for her for some reason. PBS ran a sympathetic story at the time that included this paragraph, quote, Osaka, who is black, Asian, and female, may have contended with an even greater sense of vulnerability this past year in light of the Black Lives Matter protests and the increased violence against Asian Americans. Studies have shown that individuals suffer from vicarious trauma when members of their group are targeted and discriminated against. Yes, the tennis star was suffering from vicarious trauma. Those are two words we're apparently meant to take seriously when they're put together. And so, just to be clear, vicarious trauma means trauma that allegedly happens to someone else far away who you've never even met could still mean trauma for you as well. So we're supposed to take that seriously. You know, also things like intergenerational trauma that we hear about and so on. Now, we've all seen dozens of stories like this. So when I saw the Variety piece, it occurred to me that the story here isn't really about the rise of trigger warnings per se, as plenty of people have complained about the trigger warnings and how silly they are, and for good reason. But really the story is about the fact that so many Americans now erroneously believe that they are suffering from trauma. And with that in mind, there's an obvious question to ask, which is, when did that happen and why? How do we end up in a country where you've got millions of people walking around who have never been on a battlefield, who have never had anything truly terrible happen to them, and yet if you talk to them, they will tell you that they are suffering from trauma, that they are in fact traumatized on a daily, on a daily basis in some cases. The dramatic rise of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, might provide an important clue. This is not the whole story, but it's part of it. In 2022, instances of alleged post-traumatic stress disorder in college students in America rose by 7.5%, which is more than double the rate from just 5 years earlier. That suggests that something artificial might be going on here that's making more college kids suffer from trauma. Now, at the same time, of course, 2022 was right in the middle of the COVID lockdowns, which obviously destroyed many lives. So you might think that maybe that's what this is related to. But PTSD, as it's generally understood, involves witnessing an extreme and catastrophic injury or something along those lines. And that's why the diagnosis became mainstream following the Vietnam War. And there were no wars directly involving American college students that occurred during the COVID lockdowns. Additionally, violent crime in many major cities was down by nearly a third during the early phase of the lockdown. So how exactly would COVID have been responsible for PTSD-related suffering? Well, here's one mental health expert at Indiana's largest nonprofit healthcare provider trying to explain. Watch.
People that already had PTSD saw an emergence of symptoms, a return of symptoms, a worsening of symptoms. Their fears were verified. The world is a dangerous place. We all might be in trouble. Maybe I might get sick. Maybe I might get hurt. What was also explained to me by a patient that masks are more troublesome because people that have trauma don't like looking at people in the eyes. Oftentimes the aggressors used that, look at me in the eyes before they harmed them, or don't look at me in the eyes. And now if you have a mask on, there's nothing left but to look in someone's eyes. And so it's traumatizing. Also, you cannot easily identify people with a mask on. So worrying, where your brain can quickly switch from that's not someone that hurt me in the past to now, are we sure that's not someone that hurt me in the past? Because half of their face is covered. It's not so easy anymore.
So then masks, which the medical establishment told us to wear at all times during this period, even though they didn't stop the transmission of COVID, were actually hell on earth for PTSD sufferers, apparently. This is the explanation they've come up with. And if you're keeping track, we went from masks are bad to masks are mandatory to you should triple mask, back down to if you wear a mask, you're torturing PTSD sufferers who happen to look at you. It's not exactly a compelling argument, and it seems pretty strained, actually. So maybe there's another explanation for surging rates of PTSD and trauma, quote unquote, in the general population. What might that reason be? Well, you got to go farther back than COVID. It turns out that back in 2013, leading medical associations radically altered the meaning of trauma. This is a common theme with the medical organizations where they take something, especially something that's a mental health problem, and they expand and expand and expand the definition until eventually everybody has it. So we've seen this with many things, PTSD just being one of them. As one Berkeley psychology professor recently told the New York Times, quote, some changes to the Diagnostic Manual of Psychological Disorders may have blurred the line between PTSD and disorders like depression or anxiety. In 2013, the committee overseeing revisions to the manual expanded the list of potential PTSD symptoms to include dysphoria, or a deep sense of unease and a negative worldview, which could also be caused by depression. The Times report added, PTSD was introduced as an official diagnosis in 1980 as it became clear that combat experiences had imprinted on many Vietnam veterans, making it difficult for them to work or participate in family life. Over the decades that followed, the definition was revised to encompass a large range of injury, violence, and abuse, as well as indirect exposure to traumatic events. So in other words, with very little fanfare, the medical establishment completely redefined the meaning of PTSD and the trauma necessary to qualify for a diagnosis. And once again, this is the trajectory that we follow with almost every mental illness or mental health challenge. It starts, first they come up with the idea of it, they come up with the label, and it applies to a small subset of the population, and as time goes on, it expands and expands and expands and expands, so that eventually every single living human on Earth could qualify as having PTSD, or depression, or anxiety, or ADHD. So now it's no longer necessary to personally witness a violent death or injury to receive a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's enough to indirectly experience such a violent death or injury. That is trauma under the new standard. This is what psychologists are telling their patients. The only limitation, as far as I can tell from reading through the DSM-5, is that this indirect exposure has to involve a loved one. But even then, it's no longer necessary for your symptoms to involve vivid flashbacks and extreme social dysfunction or anything like that. Because now, if you have a deep sense of unease and a negative worldview, then you have PTSD. Like, never mind the fact that probably the vast majority of people in the country have at least sometimes a deep sense of unease and even a negative worldview. In fact, every person who's ever lived on the planet struggles at least at times with a deep sense of unease and has, if not all the time, often a worldview that could be described as negative. So again, every single person could have PTSD. That's all it takes to suffer trauma, according to every major medical institution at this point. And this is one way in which the concept of trauma has been expanded and overdiagnosed into oblivion. They just changed the meaning of the word back in 2013, probably to enable more doctors to diagnose more patients and prescribe them some more drugs. And then that lingo filters down to the media and everywhere else. And if that sounds far-fetched or conspiratorial, consider the fact that another convenient rebranding took place that same year in 2013. That was also the year that the American Medical Association, or AMA, abruptly decided to reclassify obesity as a disease, just like asthma or diabetes. So this happened in the same year. But the AMA privately acknowledged that obesity didn't actually meet the criteria to be classified as a disease because there are no unique symptoms that only obese people suffer from. It's also the only disease in the world that can be cured with a 100% success rate by expending more calories than you're consuming. Nevertheless, the AMA simply decided that reclassifying obesity as a disease would have a positive impact on society, so they did it. And this is how the psychiatric community decides, ultimately, whether something will be classified as a mental illness or not. It's not, the criteria is not, is it actually a mental illness? The criteria is, would calling it a mental illness or a disease, would calling it that have a positive impact on society? And again, notice that that question is different from, is it true? Would have a positive impact? Is it true? Those are actually two different questions. The Lancet documented all of this, as I outlined a few months ago. And now, just a few years later, Oprah's hosting an hour-long special in which she confidently suggests that Ozempic is the miracle drug that can cure this disease. Now, there's reason to believe that the same approach has now been applied to trauma, much like the idea of like land acknowledgements. This massively expanded definition of trauma has quickly made its way from a handful of elite academics all the way to everyday life. So now we get trigger warnings on Netflix and Hulu and the theater and everywhere else. But much more importantly, now millions of Americans incorrectly believe that they've suffered trauma when they haven't. They are under the impression that their problems are far more serious and uncontrollable than they really are. Now, that's good for the people prescribing the medications and doing the talk therapy. Keeps the money rolling in. For everybody else, it's yet another sign that we're becoming a weaker and more broken society, one that inevitably will become even easier to control and manipulate. Now let's get to our 5 headlines. You know, I'm a moderately large sports fan, and that's why I love Bet Online. Beyond traditional sports, Bet Online gives you the option to bet on political events like the outcome of the presidential election, whether Hunter Biden will serve jail time before 2025 or who will be the next Republican speaker. Political betting allows you to wager on real-world events outside of the realm of sports. Or if you're a diehard sports fan, Bet Online makes sports betting more accessible and convenient than ever before. With just a few clicks, you can place bets on your favorite team or events from the comfort of your own home. BetOnline prides themselves on their higher-than-average betting limits of up to $25,000. You can increase your wagering amounts by contacting their player services desk by phone or email. So whether you're watching your favorite team or the news and upcoming elections, why not spice things up with a friendly wager on BetOnline? Go to betonline.ag. To place your bets today, use promo code Walsh for a 50% instant deposit bonus of up to $1,000. That's betonline.ag. Use promo code Walsh BetOnline, the options are endless. Okay, the Post-Millennial reports during a recent interview with CNN, Rachel Maddow revealed that she was worried that if reelected in November, Donald Trump would put her and other civilians in camps. The former president was asked in May whether he would construct detention facilities to hold illegal immigrants during his planned deportation effort. He said he would not rule out anything. Maddow, however, appeared to believe that Trump would go beyond simply using the camps to hold illegal immigrants and instead fill them up with people that he's singled out for being disloyal or simply disagreeable. She claimed to be among those on his list. According to the New York Post, the MSNBC host said that she was worried about the country broadly if we put somebody in power who is openly avowing that he plans to build camps to hold millions of people and to root out what he's described in subhuman terms as his enemy from within. When Trump used that language, he was referring to those who had entered the country illegally, many of whom had criminal records. Quote, for that matter, she continued, what convinces you that these massive camps he's planning are only for migrants? So yes, I'm worried about me, but only as much as I'm worried about all of us. Well, so it's very courageous. She's very heroic. She's worried that Trump is going to round up all the MSNBC anchors and throw them in camps, which is an idea that some people would find very attractive. Like there are some people out there that if Trump ran on that, he said, I'm going to round up all the people at MSNBC and throw them in a camp. There are some people who would be quite happy and thrilled with that idea. I'm not saying I'm one of them. I'm just saying that there are people out there. I find it quite disturbing that anybody would have that attitude, but there are people out there that would hear that and go, oh, really? Well, now I'm going to vote for him even harder. Of course, that's not actually going to happen in a million years, but if you listen to the media, they're very concerned about it. You should know that Brian Stelter agrees with her, which obviously lends her view even more credibility because we all rely on Brian Stelter for these sorts of things. Here he is on CNN. He was fired by CNN, but I don't know if he was being interviewed or he got his job back, or I think he's just being interviewed. So they fired him and then brought him on for an interview for some reason to ask about this idea. Is Trump going to round up all of the liberal cable news hosts and throw them in camps? And here's what he had to say about that.
It's valuable to think ahead to what may happen in a second Trump term. This is frankly speculative nonfiction because we use the words that Trump and his allies have said, and we use them to talk about the future. Jail, of course, is the extreme part of the spectrum. Imprisonment is an extreme part. But think about IRS audits. Think about government pressure on media companies. Think about other forms of government interference. There are a lot of pressure points. And frankly, Rachel Maddow is not the only member of the media thinking about this. I've talked to the heads of news organizations, CEOs of media companies that are thinking through, not in dramatic fashion, not because they're afraid of going to jail, but because they want to know what could Trump do to use his power in a second term to punish the media.
I like how Stelter is still pretending that important people in the media talk to him. He's still why would they? He's some unemployed guy with a Twitter account, and he's acting like he'd call up the CEOs of the presidents of major media organizations and just hop on the line with them, and they'll talk to him, which I tend to doubt. But anyway, he says that Maddow is right to be concerned about retribution from Trump, and because this is the kind of guy that Trump is. So these people just continue to do Trump the favor of pretending that he's far more hardcore than he really is. In reality, Trump is probably, you can make the argument that he's the least vengeful person who has ever lived on earth. I'm not sure I've ever witnessed a person that is less vengeful than Donald Trump. Because the truth is that you can say all kinds of horrible things about Donald Trump. You can conspire to destroy him. You can heap contempt on him. You can defame him. You could try to put him in prison. You can do all of that. And you can do that for years. But if you then say one nice thing about him, after all of that, he will embrace you as a friend. And we've seen this time and time again. There are countless examples of people that have said the most horrific things about him and accused him of all manner of things publicly and for a long time. And then they turn around and they say something nice about him, and Trump, he invites him on stage. He's this person is great all of a sudden. Fantastic person. So I don't think I've ever heard of anyone who holds a grudge less than Trump. Because the only thing he cares about is what you're saying about him and how you're treating him right now. He's happy to forget about yesterday and every day before that. In fact, that's a weakness. He's far too happy to forgive and forget than he should be, in my mind. Now, granted, these corporate media anchors and so on, they're not going to start saying nice things about him once he's in office, but they're going to continue to treat him the same way they have this whole time. But even then, he's not going to seek vengeance against them. Whether he should or shouldn't, for better or worse, he will not seek vengeance. There's really there's no evidence that Trump will do that. And there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, especially considering, again, he was actually in office for 4 years. And there was no campaign of retribution against anyone. And in fact, what will most likely happen is when he gets in office, he will hold out hope that he can win these people over. So that is his optimism and his willingness to forgive and forget are his greatest weaknesses, actually. He's far too optimistic and far too forgiving. And the way the media talks about him, of course, they try to paint it as exactly the opposite of what it really is. Which, as we've discussed, that's why it's one of the reasons why he's doing well in the polls. It's one of the reasons why their criticisms of him just don't land. It's all background noise at this point. It's all baked into the cake. It's all those things. But also, people are not stupid, and their criticisms of him. It's one thing to have an exaggerated criticism. That can be effective if you're at least in the vicinity of the truth. If you're identifying someone's actual weaknesses and then exaggerating them, that's one thing. But their criticisms of Trump just don't ring true at all. All right. The Blaze has this report. A report citing WNBA sources, including an executive from one of the teams, revealed that despite the league's wall-to-wall coverage, it will still lose $50 million for the 2024 season. With the Basketball Association reportedly taking in between $180 million and $200 million the previous season, it's still just a fraction of the $10 billion earned by the NBA. Given that NBA Commissioner Adam Silver said in 2018 that the WNBA loses about $10 million per year, that would amount to at least $200 million and upwards of $260 million in losses since the league's inception in 1997. Another anonymous WNBA team executive admitted in the report that WNBA likely would cease to exist without the financial backing of the NBA, an idea that has been the theory of sports fans for some time. And now we have an actual WNBA executive admitting this. Quote, this is a direct quote from this WNBA executive. The truth is, this league would be hard-pressed to exist without the NBA. Even with all the apparent success, it doesn't seem like the league can be pushed into the black simply by the existence of star Caitlin Clark, who has been a marketing sensation for the WNBA. Of course, they're underselling it. It's not just that the league would be hard-pressed to exist without the NBA. It could not exist at all. The WNBA is held in existence by the NBA. I just saw someone on Twitter say the WNBA is basically just a charity for lesbians. I think it was Jesse Kelly who said that. So I wish it was my line, but it isn't. It's essentially what it is. I think it's a pretty good way of putting it. But this is good. It brings us back down to earth a bit. It recenters us. It grounds us, I think. Let's not get carried away. There's been a lot of talk about the WNBA, a lot. It's a very bizarre world that we have found ourselves in over the last couple of months. Even on this show, I've talked about the I mean, right now I'm talking about it again. I went through, how long have I been doing this? I've been doing this for, how many episodes has it been? Too many. Thousands. And, you go through the first, 6 years and talk about the WNBA once. And then from then, just over the last couple of months, it's been a constant drumbeat of the WNBA. So it's very bizarre. And yes, Caitlin Clark is the most popular female basketball player of all time. And that's true, and that's an accomplishment for her. But it's like saying that Pete Weber is the most popular professional bowler of all time. And to that, you're probably saying, well, who the hell is Pete Weber? Well, exactly. It's all relative. I might know who the great professional bowlers are, but most people don't. And I know because I Googled it 5 seconds ago. Because professional bowling will always be professional bowling, no matter how many Pete Webers they may have, and the WNBA will always be the WNBA. And when it comes down to it, nobody really watches women's basketball. Caitlin Clark is a viral sensation. She's controversial. For reasons that have nothing to do with her, she's never said anything remotely controversial. By her own merits, she's actually the least controversial person in the world. As far as I know, she's never said anything she's never said anything that approaches the realm of being provocative. Okay, she's not in the ballpark of that. So she seems to be just a very friendly, nice, normal person who happens to be, by female standards, good at basketball. So by no fault of her own, and not due to anything that she's done or said, she's controversial because of how she's being treated. And all of these things together make her kind of an anomaly, but even that isn't enough to make people actually care. I mean, actually care about women's basketball. And so for all of this talk, and everybody rallying around the WNBA, when it comes down to it, still after all of this, nobody is actually watching. Now there are some people that they hear about this Caitlin Clark person and they're confused. Like, this is a female basketball player. Why are we talking about a female? We have never talked about female basketball players before. The only other time is when one of them was imprisoned in Russia. That was the only other time we ever even heard of one. And now we're talking about a female basketball player based on what they're doing on the court. What is this? And so people are curious and they tune in, and that's good for the WNBA. But when you look at the ratings for every other team and everything else, it's all just the same. And it's because, if you're not interested in basketball, then you're not going to watch the WNBA. You might tune in just because there's this anomaly, because people are talking about it. Out of curiosity, you might tune in once or twice, but you're not going to keep watching. And then, so that's all the non-basketball fans. They're not, the WNBA can't reach them because they don't care about basketball. The only people they can reach are basketball fans, obviously. But the thing is, if you're a basketball fan and you have a choice between watching men play or women play, you're going to watch the men because they're just a lot better, and that makes them much more entertaining. All right. I've got some good news for a change here. WUSA9.com has this report. Younger generations are swapping dating apps for live events as they grapple with online dating app fatigue. A new report from event management site Eventbrite found a rise in speed dating and singles events in the last year, with over 1.5 million searches for such events on the platform. The report comprised of event data from a one-year period found attendance to singles and dating events increased 42% from 2022 to 2023. Eventbrite's CEO said singles have voiced their frustrations with online dating, and we've heard them loud and clear. They want more in-person opportunities to connect and bond over mutual passions, be it paddleboard yoga, kombucha brewing, backyard beekeeping, or freehand glass blowing. Could you have picked more obscure things for people to do on a date? How do you go how do you do beekeeping as a date? And I say this as a retired beekeeper myself, and so there's no shade on beekeepers whatsoever, but it's not really a dating activity. I mean, you're in the whole beekeeping outfit to begin with. You look ridiculous. Nobody looks cool in a beekeeping outfit. It's impossible. And like, what are you doing? What is the date exactly? Kombucha, paddleboard yoga. What the hell is that? Yoga on a paddleboard, I suppose. Okay. I'll tell you one thing. This is Eventbrite, and so you can do all those things. You can do freehand glass blowing as a date, but if you want to use Eventbrite to organize the event, you certainly cannot have any kind of singles event where they're watching my film, What is a Woman, because I am banned from Eventbrite, which I think that would make a great date, first of all. And it's actually a good way to weed out potential matches. You know, if you suggest, hey, let's as on our date, let's watch the Matt Walsh hit, What is a Woman? And if they react to that in a negative way, then you know that this is someone that is not worthy of going on a date with. Eventbrite's report, which surveyed about 1,000 people, found that more than 50% of daters have a hard time starting or continuing meaningful conversations online. Safety was also a top concern among daters. Additionally, nearly half of Gen Z participants and more than a third of millennials noted one of the biggest challenges of online dating is finding potential partners who have shared interests. As a result, Eventbrite found that young singles are increasingly moving away from bars and parties to hobby-based and interest-focused activities. And also moving away from apps. Many young daters are experiencing swipe fatigue from popular dating apps, according to the report. Well, anyway, this is a very good trend, reason for hope, a white pill, perhaps. I think a white pill is the good one, I believe. And the move away from dating apps is a positive. Any trend at all that involves people engaging in the real physical world, like actually engaging with people physically in the real world, any trend like that is good and should be encouraged. And I say that not because there's anything in principle wrong with meeting people online. As I've always said, dating sites, dating apps, in theory, they have their place. 10 to 15 years ago, when I was single, it was different. Now at that point, they had not completely taken over. They were a tool that you could use, a useful tool. But the dating scene, utterly dominated by apps, well, that's a different story entirely. Because the dating apps are so depersonalized and they reduce you to a picture on a screen, one picture among thousands of others, and the other person is making a decision about you based on basically nothing. There are some things in life that cannot, I think what we've discovered is that there are some things in life that cannot be effectively reduced down to an algorithm. In fact, most things in life cannot be effectively reduced down to an algorithm. Algorithms are not going to improve your life. It's very hard to think of an example of where algorithms have improved anyone's life, made them happier, made them better people. But that's especially true when it comes to dating. And then there's also with the dating apps, there's it's a very weird sort of dynamic because it feels like when you're on the dating app, just talking to younger people who are single and on the dating apps, it's kind of it feels like the worst of all worlds because on one hand, it feels like there's nobody out there and there are not enough choices, but at the same time, there's this vast overabundance of choices. There's just too many people, and you're making decisions about them very quickly. I mean, just that act of like swiping past somebody. It's a very dehumanizing act, making a decision about someone just with that simple act of swiping. I think ultimately does not have a good effect. So if we're moving away from that, I would say that's a good thing. All right, one other story I have to mention, because nobody else will. Well, nobody else at the Daily Wire will tell you about this. So I have to do it. But I thought this was a very interesting report. Doesn't require a lot of commentary. There's not much additional to say about it. I just want to let you know that this is going on. So this is from The Hill. Has this report. An unidentified, technologically advanced population could be living secretly on Earth. The startling claim was made in a new paper by researchers at Harvard and Montana Technological University. They speculate that unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, otherwise known as UFOs, of course, could be living underground, on the moon, or even walking among humans. I don't think the UFOs are not walking among humans, but I think what they're saying is that the aliens came in the UFOs and are now walking among humans. This is a scientific paper. This is a research paper. And when have you ever known anything outlandish or false to be contained in a research paper? It's never happened. I mean, people have done research on this. They put it in a paper. What else do you need to know? The researchers acknowledge in the paper that their hypotheses may be regarded skeptically by the general scientific community, but they still deserve consideration in a spirit of epistemic humility and openness. And that's a good phrase, epistemic humility. I should probably start using that. All the people out there that make fun of me every time I talk about UFOs. What I should be telling them is that you need to demonstrate more epistemic humility in your approach to this issue. The paper posits the possibility of crypto-terrestrials as an explanation for unidentified and unexplainable observations made worldwide each year. Here are the theories proposed in the paper. So this paper gives a number of theories about how the aliens got here, what they're doing here, and all the rest of it. And so here are their theories. They put a lot of research into this. They've been studying this for a long time. This is what they came up with. 4 theories. A remnant form of ancient civilization remains on Earth. An intelligent species evolved separately from humans and now stays hidden. Maybe like a Bigfoot scenario, could be. Crypto-terrestrials traveled from another time period or planet. And then their final theory that they've included in the scientific paper, that's all just pure science. The unidentified creatures are of supernatural origin, likened to earthbound angels. The paper also suggests the idea of crypto-terrestrials living in or under sighting hotspots such as lakes and volcanoes. Because that's a fifth theory. So we've got remnant ancient civilization. We've got like a Bigfoot. We could have Bigfoot, time travelers, angels, and then also there's the possibility that there are some sort of beings living in volcanoes and lakes. And you know, that's it. That's the scientific paper. That's the theory. I find it based on what I know about these researchers, based on what I know about Harvard and Montana Technological University, very esteemed university. It's not like I just found out that place exists right now. Based on what I know about all that, I would, and based on my own research into this subject that, as you know, has been going on for years now, I would rate this claim and these theories as highly, highly credible. Does your debt keep you tossing and turning at night? It's like you can't get away from it. The unfortunate reality is that our banking system is designed to trap you in debt. These insanely high interest credit cards and loans make it nearly impossible to pay off your debt. Thankfully, there's a new way out of the debt trap with the Zero Debt USA. You've probably heard me talk about pivotal debt solutions. Well, now they're known as Zero Debt USA, and they have new aggressive strategies that can end your debt faster and easier than you thought possible. Zero Debt USA can cut or even eliminate interest. They'll help you find programs to write off your balances so you owe less. They can stop those threatening phone calls, and they can do all of this without bankruptcy and without a loan. Bottom line, they find every solution possible to end your debt permanently. Before you do anything, contact Zero Debt USA first at zapmydebt.com. Talk to them for free and find out how fast they can help you get out of debt. That's zapmydebt.com, zapmydebt.com. Today we're introduced to some new terminology on the daily cancellation. It's always a bad sign when that happens. But here's a young lady complaining about her struggles in landing a job. She needs to find employment, but she also needs an employer who can provide accommodations for her condition. What is her condition? Well, of course, it's something totally fake and made up, of course, but here it is. Watch.
So I just got yelled at for asking a very reasonable question. So I'm applying to go somewhere, and I just wanted to know, are there accommodations for people who struggle with time blindness and being on time, you know? And then the person I was with interrupted and acted like I was asking something else. And then when we were done, they actually started yelling at me and saying that accommodations for time blindness doesn't exist. And if you struggle with being on time, you'll never be able to get a job. You know, provided you're trying your absolute best to be there. And then they're like, your stupid generation wants to destroy the workplace. And yeah, I think that a culture where workers are just cut off because they struggle with being on time, when there's other solutions that we can look to, I think that just anybody who thinks it's okay to just treat people like that, yeah, that culture needs to be dismantled. And then I asked that person, how can you feel good about yourself upholding this kind of system? And then to think I'm entitled. No, if people think it's okay to treat others like this, that's entitlement.
So I'll never show up on time and I want to dismantle your workplace. Please hire me. Apparently that sales pitch didn't work. Well, you heard that right. Time blindness. This young person suffers from an unfortunate malady that causes her to be blind to the time. She needs accommodations for her disability. What sort of accommodations? Well, presumably her prospective employer simply needs to accommodate her coming into work whenever she feels like it or not at all. She'll just randomly wander into work and wander out suddenly, and they'll have to work around her. Maybe she'll come on time and leave on time. Maybe she'll come 45 minutes late and leave an hour early. Maybe she'll come 3 hours early, leave 5 hours after closing. You never know. She's blind to the time. Somehow this interviewer was not on board with this proposal. It seems that the prospective employer in this case is a tyrant who oppressively demands that workers, show up for work. Now, you might assume, or at least you might like to believe, that this time blindness concept is an innovation of this random TikToker. You might even like to give her credit for coming up with a creative and unintentionally hilarious fake disability to justify her laziness and lack of punctuality. Sadly, however, she did not come up with this concept. I'm very sad to report that this is a thing. It's not a real thing, but it is a thing. The website Healthline has this to say about time blindness. Time blindness is a cognitive condition that causes difficulties in perceiving and managing time, often leading to challenges in punctuality and planning. Do you find yourself able to estimate the time without glancing at the clock, even when it's been a while since you looked? Most individuals with typical neurology possess an internal clock that generally gauges how much time has passed. But some individuals, such as individuals with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, lack this natural timekeeping sense. This is often referred to as time blindness. Time blindness can significantly affect your daily life, hindering your ability to meet deadlines, manage responsibilities, and plan effectively. So people with time blindness have no internal sense of time. They can't tell if 5 minutes have passed or 5 hours. It could be 9 a.m. or 3 in the afternoon. They have no idea. They have no natural timekeeping sense. This is time blindness. Now, of course, in the old days, there was a different term for this condition. They used to call it being a woman. My wife, for instance, will tend to estimate that any task, no matter what it is, will take 20 minutes. In my wife's world, everything takes 20 minutes, regardless. But I've realized over the course of our marriage that 20 minutes is shorthand for really any amount of time longer than 5 minutes, but shorter than 7 years is 20 minutes. This is especially true when it comes to estimating the amount of time it will take to travel from one place to another. Like she'll tell me on a Saturday morning that she wants to, for us all to do some sort of activity as a family, go somewhere and do something, and I'll ask how far away is the activity, and she'll say, it's like 20 minutes. And then I'll look it up and I'll discover that the activity is 4,000 miles away. It's somewhere down in South America. And by 20 minutes, she meant that it would take 36 and a half hours to drive there. But even this is not really time blindness. I mean, my wife is still capable of getting to places on time. There's no actual time blindness. And besides, if such a thing did exist, there are these things called clocks. We all carry clocks around in our pockets everywhere we go. It's not like our only way to measure time is a sundial We have to hope it's not cloudy today so we can see what time it is. And yet time blindness is still trotted out as an excuse. Here's a psychologist with a large social media following who presents a clip of another psychologist explaining this concept of time blindness. Watch.
If you have ever questioned if ADHD and time blindness is real, listen to this.
ADHD, right, is at its heart a blindness to time, or technically, to be exact, it is a nearsightedness to the future. Just as people who are nearsighted can only read things close at hand, people with ADHD can only deal with things near in time. The further out the event lies, the less they are capable of dealing with it. And this is why everything is left to the last minute, because they only deal with last minutes. That's all they perceive, that's all they deal with, that's all they organize to. And so their life is a series of one crisis after another, all of which were avoidable because people prepared, and they didn't.
You don't believe that time blindness and ADHD are real? Oh yeah, well, here's a guy saying they are, okay? Like, how is that proof of anything? So people always think they can do this. Just, oh yeah, you don't believe this is true? Here's some guy who says that it is. Well, why do I care what this guy says? Who? So we see that, unfortunately, whiny Gen Zers on TikTok aren't inventing these ideas. They are taught these ideas, taught the ideas by what they perceive to be experts and authority figures. This guy has an MD next to his name, but that doesn't make what you just heard any less nonsensical. He says that people with ADHD have time blindness because they can only deal with things near in time. They are not capable of planning for any event farther away. He compares it to being nearsighted. But these are not the same things. Okay, I am nearsighted. Without my glasses, I am quite literally incapable of reading things far away. I can't physically do it. There is no incentive, no reward, no punishment, no threat that could ever change that situation. If you take away my glasses, hold a book 10 feet away, and demand that I read it, I will not be able to do it. I just can't. If you put a gun to my head and said, read the book or I'll blow your brains out, I still would not be able to do it. If you offered me $100 million, I still would not be able to. I can't. I am incapable. My eyes have physical limitations that I have no control over whatsoever. That is not the case for people with ADHD, quote unquote, who are quote unquote blind to time or have time nearsightedness. People like the doctor in that clip, they use terms like can't and incapable because they want their patients to think that they are totally helpless. But that is obviously not the case. It is difficult for procrastinators to complete tasks on time. I know that myself as a lifelong procrastinator. But does that mean that they can't? Are they incapable? He said that he claims that people with ADHD can't even perceive of time existing in the future. They can only perceive of this moment. So apparently, if you have ADHD, the idea of there being a future is you don't even realize that. You don't know. What does that even mean? No. It may be difficult if you're wired a certain way to do things on time and to do them or even do them ahead of time. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. I have to continually emphasize this. Just because it is hard for you to do something does not mean that you can't do it. It does not mean that you suffer from some disability that physically hinders your ability to do it at all. As always, it's really about effort and incentives. If you are not showing up on time, if you are not prepared for things in the future, it's because you do not care enough to put in the effort. It's not your ADHD, quote unquote. It's that you don't care enough. You don't have enough desire to do it. Here's how I know that. Let's use this thought experiment once again, because I think it's a useful one. Imagine that I came to you and I said that I have $10 million in cash that I would like to give you. But I will only give you the $10 million next Wednesday at 7 in the morning at a location 90 minutes away. Next Wednesday, 7 in the morning, here's the location, 90 minutes away. Be there or be square. If you want the $10 million, you need to be there at that location exactly on time or early. Okay? Something tells me that your time blindness is going to magically clear up for this occasion. Even you, riddled with ADHD, totally blind to time, even someone with your condition will find a way to get there on time next Wednesday at 7 in the morning to receive your $10 million prize. You will be there. The woman in the TikTok, she will be there. She will be there. She will be there early, and she will be ready for that money. Why? Because the incentive is so great and your desire is so great that it will magically overcome your fake disability. Okay, there's so many other examples. It's just like people that claim, oh, I can't go on a diet. I can't eat healthy. I can't have obesity. Okay, if I offered you $10 million and said, don't eat anything sugary for a week, you would do it. Easily, actually. It wouldn't even be hard with that kind of money on the line. What does that prove? It proves that you can if you feel incentivized. Now, on the other hand, if you offered me $10 million to take off my glasses and read size 12 font from 10 feet away, I would be just as incapable of completing the task as I would be if there was no reward on the table. That's because with a real and physical problem like nearsightedness, there is no amount of effort or desire that can ever change it. And the incentives don't have to be that significant. As I said, I am a procrastinator myself. If time blindness is a thing, then I have it. If ADHD is a thing, then I have that too. I had to go to the DMV recently to renew my car registration. Not only did I not get there on time, but I was like 5 months late. And I still didn't even go, my wife went for me, okay? Because like getting me to go to the DMV, it will take me years to go. You could tell me you need to be at the DMV for this thing, next Wednesday is the cutoff date. I will be there sometime in the year 2028 if I go at all. I can't, you cannot get me to go. You can't. Well, you could, that's what the point, but it takes a lot. And that's because I just really don't want to go to the DMV. I just don't want to go. I really, really don't want to go. I feel very little incentive. And the threat of not going, oh, you'll get a fine. Okay, well, I'll take, I haven't gotten the fine yet. I'm driving around with expired tags. No one's pulled me over yet. I figure, let's at least wait till I get pulled over one time and then I'll think about it. So my time blindness tends to flare up wherever the DMV is concerned. My time blindness flares up wherever any kind of like paperwork or waiting in lines or anything like that. That's when I become especially blind to time. Now, on the other hand, I'm going fishing on Sunday at a lake on Father's Day, and it's a lake I haven't fished yet. Well, I've already downloaded topographical maps of the lake. I've researched information on depth and water clarity, water temps. I know where the feeder creeks are and the inlets and coves. I've already gone out and bought a few new lures that match the bait fish that will be most plentiful in this lake in the places I'm going to be fishing at this time of year. Okay, I procrastinate on things like the DMV, but when it comes to fishing a new lake, I am squared away, fully prepared. I'm ready to go. Why? Well, because I like to fish. I enjoy it. I put in the effort because it's fun. I don't enjoy the DMV, so I put in less effort. This is the great mystery of time blindness. I have solved it. You aren't blind to time. You aren't incapable of showing up and being prepared. You just don't want to. You don't care enough. Now, this should all be pretty obvious. But it's not obvious in a culture where we've turned every human flaw, as we talked about in the opening, into a medical diagnosis. People take solace in the diagnosis. They seek out the diagnosis. They wear it like a badge of honor. They are relieved to get it. They go searching for it online. They plug in all of their character flaws into Google and they look for some sort of label and they go, oh, I have that. Thank God. Oh, that's my thing. I have that thing there. That's the reason. And so I can never improve myself ever because this is what I have. And how dare you suggest that I have any control over my life whatsoever? People are just looking for an excuse. It is really that simple. So much of this is just simply people wanting an excuse. And it's an excuse that the medical establishment is happy to provide because it means that you will rely on them, on their treatments, their drugs, their therapies, rather than taking charge of your own life and your own behavior. That's what this is all about, as always. And it's why time blindness is today canceled. That'll do it for the show today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you tomorrow. Have a great day. Godspeed.
24-Hour Fitness approves BLM and Pride logos, but not American flags. A white girl goes viral for saying the N-word. And Harvard researchers claim a UFO civilization could be living underneath the Earth. Check it out on The Michael Knowles Show.